My psycho cousin is threatening to hurt my family if we don't give him more money. So I'm setting him up and risking my life to put him in prison. My parents are the type of people who should have never had kids. When I was 7, I got the flu, and as I was throwing up into the toilet bowl, I begged my mom for some medicine. But instead, she just put a breathing exercise on YouTube and reminded me to inhale until my diaphragm expands all the way. Meanwhile, my dad was a workaholic. So by the time I was 16, I was basically one of those emo freaks who looked like the store Spencer's, or Hot Topic, was made for them. But it was all for one simple reason: to cope with my unbearable loneliness. I was an only child with no friends, and when I wasn't blaring music on full volume on my headphones or playing with my cat, it was a feeling that was basically impossible to ignore. And it was on my 18th birthday that I got the text. It was my aunt wishing me a happy birthday on WhatsApp. I didn't even know what to say, so I just reacted with the heart emoji. And I guess one thing led to another, because she ended up inviting me to stay with her and her family in Pennsylvania. Sometimes I wish I never said yes, because to this day, she's still one of the kindest people I've ever met. The type to spend her time sitting on a bench on the street and writing wholesome poems about everyone who walked by. And the first thing her husband, my uncle, told me when I arrived was that he was happy to have me. And there was something about the way he smiled and the look in his eyes that made me believe he was telling the truth. Even my 2 cousins showed me around the entire city and paid for everything. It made me so depressed knowing that there was a part of my family I was hidden from, one where I actually felt loved. So I was fast asleep at 2 a.m. with a smile on my face when I heard the front door of the house slam open. I then heard footsteps going into my uncle and aunt's room, followed by glass breaking on the floor. "Give me $50, the voice bellowed. I honestly thought we were being robbed and I expected my uncle to shoot him down. But instead he replied with, "We already gave you $70 this week, Trent. That's way over the limit." Suddenly the shelf was knocked to the floor. "Okay, we're PayPaling it now, please leave us alone," my aunt cried. Turns out Trent is my abusive older cousin with an unconventional nighttime routine. He leaves the house at 8 p.m., gets wasted on whatever he can with the money his parents give him, then comes home and manipulates them for more. At the time I didn't really care, because it was still 1,000 times better than the home I grew up in. Plus, my other cousins, Samuel and Daisy, swore he'd never hurt me. But the more I found out, the more scared I became. Apparently he was schizophrenic, and had threatened the entire family multiple times, and I was pretty much able to ignore it, until one day when I was on a late-night walk with my uncle. He was lifting his arms up to stretch when I saw the bruises on his stomach area. My eyes widened. Well, my uncle was always pretty open about stuff, so he told me straight away. Trent did it. His tone was sad, like it was just another daily occurrence rather than straight-up abuse. It was after I told him he was 30 and he'd been living the same shitty life for 10 years, that he couldn't keep living off us and had to get a job. I buried my face in my hands, but that's when he whipped out his big black iPhone. On it were dozens of texts from Trent. "You'll die alone and unloved. You don't care about anyone but yourself, you worthless piece of shit. Just watch, I'm going to make your life so bad you'll kill yourself. And for his grand finale, I'll shatter your kneecaps so hard you'll never walk right again." My jaw literally dropped. All these messages were back to back. And worst of all, it was all because my uncle refused to send him $5 for more alcohol. Over the next few days, I found out he'd been hitting my aunt, his literal mother, and threatened my cousins too. But one day my uncle said something that changed everything. Yeah, since it's always at home, he's never a public threat, so the police don't care. It was like a light bulb moment. So that same exact day, I asked Trent to go on a walk with me. He agreed, because I told him I agreed to buy him some of the devil's lettuce. And halfway through the walk, when we were on the busiest street in Pennsylvania, I said it. "Dude, you're low-key an effing joke. Like you're 30 and live off your parents. I'm 20 and I make more money than you, LMAO. I then laughed in his face. "All you do is let yourself be an addicted man baby while you cry about how it's mommy and daddy's fault." Suddenly, I was interrupted by him pushing me down to the floor. He kicked me so hard I was coughing up red. I could practically feel my windpipe being destroyed. But within just 2 minutes, cop cars showed up and he was arrested. You see, I knew if I got him to beat me up, a harmless 20-year-old girl, then law enforcement would be forced to step in. But what I didn't anticipate was the jails being overcrowded, and him being let out on good behavior after just 2 weeks in a cell. Because for the entirety of his stay, there was just one thing on his mind: getting revenge on me. The prosecutor had warned us about this, explaining that Trent had made his intentions clear to his cellmate, who had subsequently reported the threats to prison authorities. "He blames you entirely," she explained, her voice grave over the speakerphone as we all huddled around the kitchen table. "He doesn't see his actions as wrong. In his mind, you tricked and betrayed him, and he feels justified in seeking retribution." Trent was arrested again, but this time I wasn't celebrating. The image of his face as they put him in the police car haunted me. Pure hatred directed straight at me, his eyes promising retribution. I knew this wasn't over. The second arrest came after he violated the emergency protective order that had been put in place, showing up at the coffee shop where I worked part-time. He hadn't approached me, just sat in a corner booth for hours, staring, his presence a silent threat that had me shaking so badly, I dropped 3 cups and eventually had to be sent home early. The police picked him up outside the shop, but the damage was done. He had found me, had shown me that nowhere was truly safe. The judge granted a restraining order for everyone in the family. Trent wasn't allowed within 500 feet of our home or any of us. No jail time, but he was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and wear an ankle monitor that would alert authorities if he came near our house or any of our workplaces. It felt like a hollow victory, a paper shield against a real threat. The courtroom was cold and formal, the judge's voice echoing slightly as she read out the terms of the order. Trent stood with his attorney, his posture stiff, eyes fixed on me with such intensity that I had to look away, my skin crawling under his gaze. "At least he can't come near us now," my aunt said, squeezing my hand across the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly. The dark circles under her eyes had only gotten deeper, her once bright smile now strained. We were having tea, the steam rising between us, creating a momentary barrier that seemed to symbolize how fragile our protection really was. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, the gray day matching our subdued mood. I nodded, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't unravel. The restraining order was just a piece of paper. It wouldn't stop someone like Trent, who had already shown he had no respect for boundaries or consequences. I stirred my tea absently, watching the liquid swirl into a tiny whirlpool, thinking about how easily our sense of security could be disrupted, how quickly our lives had been thrown into chaos. 2 days after the hearing, I got a call from my boss at the coffee shop. "We've been reviewing your situation," she said, her voice softer than when she'd fired me after someone, obviously Trent, had created fake social media accounts in my name posting racist content and sent screenshots to my workplace. The firing had been swift and humiliating, my manager calling me into the back office and sliding printouts across the desk without meeting my eyes. I had tried to explain, to defend myself, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. Accounts with my name, my photo, spewing hateful rhetoric that made me sick to my stomach. "Some of your coworkers showed me proof those accounts weren't yours. Your position is still open if you want it." Her voice had a hint of apology now, a recognition of how quickly she had judged and condemned me without proper investigation. My coworkers, people I had barely spoken to beyond work necessities, had apparently gone to bat for me, presenting evidence that the accounts were newly created and couldn't possibly be genuine. I nearly cried with relief, my eyes stinging. "Thank you. I'll be there tomorrow." The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immense, not just the practical concern of income, but the validation that I hadn't been completely abandoned, that there were people willing to stand up for the truth. Things seemed to calm down for about a week. The packages stopped. No more dead flowers or mutilated stuffed animals left on our doorstep. No more fake social media accounts appeared. Uncle even slept through an entire night for the first time in months, not waking up every hour to check the locks. The house began to feel like a home again, rather than a fortress under siege. Daisy started playing her guitar in the evenings, the gentle music filling the living room as we all pretended to read or watch TV, each of us secretly savoring this moment of normalcy, this brief respite from constant vigilance. Then Daisy found something tucked under her windshield wiper after school, a USB drive, small and innocuous. It was just sitting there, a tiny black rectangle against the glass, easily mistaken for something she might have left herself. She brought it home, turning it over in her fingers as she described finding it, her brow furrowed with confusion rather than fear. She hadn't yet realized what it might contain. Against my warnings, she plugged it into her laptop. I had a bad feeling as soon as she mentioned it, my stomach dropping with dread. "Wait," I had said, reaching for the drive. "Let me check it on my old computer first, just in case it's a virus." But curiosity had already gotten the better of her, her finger clicking the drive open before I could stop her. It contained hundreds of photos of her, walking to class, at the mall with friends, even sleeping through her bedroom window, the flash casting an eerie glow on her peaceful face. The images filled the screen one after another as she clicked through them, her expression shifting from confusion to horror with each new revelation. There were photos from different angles, different distances, some clearly taken with a zoom lens from far away, others frighteningly close, intimate moments captured without her knowledge or consent. "He's been watching me for months," she whispered, her face ashen, hands shaking as she scrolled through the images. The realization that she had been under surveillance, that her privacy had been so thoroughly violated, seemed to hit her all at once. She slammed the laptop closed and ran to the bathroom, the sound of retching following seconds later. We called the police, but they said what we expected. Without proof it was Trent, there was nothing they could do. The restraining order only worked if we could prove he was the one violating it, and the photos themselves weren't technically illegal. They were taken in public places, except for the bedroom ones, which were too blurry to definitively prove they were taken without consent. The officer who came to take our report was sympathetic but powerless, explaining the limitations of the law with a frustration that suggested he'd had this conversation many times before. That night, I woke to the sound of scratching at my window, like fingernails dragging across glass. I froze, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, as a shadow moved across the glass. The sound was deliberate and rhythmic, too consistent to be a tree branch or animal. My entire body tensed, muscles locked with fear as I stared at the window, unable to move, barely able to breathe. By the time I gathered the courage to look, whatever it was had gone, leaving only darkness. I finally forced myself out of bed, legs shaking so badly I nearly fell, and crept to the window. The night outside was still and quiet, no movement visible in the yard below. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed it, if the stress and fear had finally manifested in auditory hallucinations. In the morning, I found claw marks on the outside of the frame, too high up to be an animal, too deliberate to be accidental. 4 parallel lines gouged into the wood, deep enough to have required significant force. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough edges where the paint had splintered away, revealing the raw wood beneath. The physical evidence made it impossible to dismiss as imagination or dream, confirming that someone had indeed been at my window in the night. "We need a security system," I told my uncle over breakfast, pushing my untouched toast away. The thought of eating made my stomach turn, anxiety having robbed me of any appetite. The kitchen was bright with morning sunlight, a deceptive cheerfulness that couldn't dispel the shadow of fear that had settled over all of us. He nodded wearily, the bags under his eyes more pronounced than ever. "I've been saving up. We'll get it installed next week." He looked older than he had when I first arrived, the constant stress etching new lines around his eyes and mouth. His shoulders slumped with the weight of responsibility, of trying to protect his family from a threat that seemed to be always one step ahead of us. But we didn't make it to next week. The following evening, I was walking home from my shift, the smell of coffee still clinging to my clothes, when a car slowed beside me. engine purring. It was a dark sedan, nondescript except for the tinted windows that prevented me from seeing the driver clearly. My pulse immediately quickened, instinct screaming danger as the vehicle matched my pace, moving slowly alongside the sidewalk where I walked. The window rolled down, revealing a man I'd never seen before, though something about his sneering expression reminded me of Trent. He had the same hollow eyes, the same contemptuous curl to his lip. He was older, maybe mid-30s, with a patchy beard and a scar cutting through his right eyebrow. The interior of the car was dark, but I could make out at least one other person in the passenger seat, a shadowy figure leaning forward with interest. "Hey, you're the one who got Trent in trouble, right?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. There was something predatory in his gaze, an assessment that made me feel like prey being sized up by a hunter. The car continued to crawl alongside me, forcing me to either stop walking or continue with this unwanted escort. I quickened my pace, not responding, my keys clutched between my fingers as a makeshift weapon. The metal dug into my palm, the pain a grounding sensation amid the surge of adrenaline and fear. My breathing became shallow and quick, my focus narrowing to the path ahead, calculating how far I was from home, from safety. "He says to tell you he's thinking about you," the man called after me, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "Says you'll get what's coming." The threat hung in the air, following me like a shadow as I practically ran the rest of the way home, the sound of the car finally receding as it turned at the corner, its mission of intimidation accomplished. That night, we had a family meeting around the kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows on everyone's worried faces. We sat in a tight circle, chairs pulled close together as if physical proximity could somehow protect us from the threats that seemed to be closing in from all sides. A notepad sat in the center of the table, filled with lists and plans, potential security measures, legal options, emergency contacts. "We can't live like this," my uncle said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I've been in touch with a lawyer. We might be able to get Trent committed for psychiatric evaluation if we can prove he's not taking his medication." His voice was steady but tired, the voice of someone who had been fighting the same battle for too long with too little progress. "He'll never agree to that," Samuel pointed out, his voice tight with frustration. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles were white. The baseball bat that had been his nighttime companion now stayed with him constantly, leaning against his chair even during meals. "He might not have a choice if we can prove he's a danger to himself or others. The lawyer thinks we have enough documentation now with the restraining order violation and the USB drive." My uncle spread his hands, palms up, in a gesture that acknowledged the difficulty of what he was proposing. Involuntary commitment was a serious step, one that would likely destroy any chance of ever repairing their relationship with Trent, but we were long past the point where that seemed possible anyway. I stared down at my hands, guilt washing over me. This is all my fault. I'm the one who provoked him. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. If I hadn't intervened, if I had just minded my own business, would things have escalated to this point? Or would the family have continued in their uneasy equilibrium, damaged but functioning? My aunt reached across the table and squeezed my fingers, her touch gentle but firm. "No, honey, this has been going on for years. You just did what none of us had the courage to do. You stood up to him." Her eyes were tired but clear, her conviction evident in the steadiness of her gaze. "We've been enabling him, making excuses, hoping he'd get better on his own. It was never going to work." The next day, Samuel and I went to the mall to pick up supplies for Daisy's birthday, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The shopping center was crowded, the weekend rush creating a constant hum of conversation and movement around us. We moved from store to store, checking items off our list, pretending we were just two normal young people on a regular shopping trip, not potential targets constantly looking over our shoulders. We were in the food court, the smell of pretzels and Chinese food filling the air, when Samuel suddenly stiffened beside me. "Don't look now, but Marcus is over by the pretzel stand." His voice was low, barely audible over the ambient noise of the mall, but the tension in it was unmistakable. Marcus was one of Trent's closest friends, a stocky guy with a shaved head and multiple tattoos, who had been at our house several times in the past, usually to drag Trent home after particularly bad benders. I casually turned my head, pretending to watch a group of teenagers at a nearby table. Sure enough, Trent's friend was leaning against the counter, staring directly at us, not even trying to be subtle about it. He was wearing a black hoodie despite the warm temperature inside the mall, hands shoved deep in the pockets, his posture radiating menace even from a distance. When he saw me notice him, his lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile that made my blood run cold. "Let's go," I whispered, gathering our shopping bags. The plastic handles cut into my fingers as I gripped them tightly, already calculating the quickest route to the exit, mentally mapping potential crowded areas where we could lose ourselves if needed. As we headed for the exit, I noticed a second man I recognized from the neighborhood, another of Trent's friends, a guy with a distinctive neck tattoo, moving to intercept us from the left. My heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding my system. The tattoo was a snake coiling around his throat, its head disappearing under his jawline, the detailed scales visible even from a distance. He moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd with his eyes fixed on us, his path clearly designed to cut off our most direct escape route. "They're trying to corner us," I hissed to Samuel. "Head for the security office." I changed direction abruptly, pulling Samuel along with me, moving against the flow of shoppers toward the center of the mall, where I had noticed the security station earlier. The crowd worked both for and against us. It slowed our pursuers but also impeded our progress, bodies becoming obstacles we had to navigate while trying to appear calm. We changed direction, moving quickly through the crowd, weaving between shoppers and kiosks. I glanced back to see both men following, not even trying to be subtle anymore, their intent clear in their purposeful strides. They had split up, each taking a different path, attempting to flank us from both sides. The coordinated nature of their pursuit confirmed this was no accidental encounter. They had been waiting for us, watching, planning. We made it to the security office and explained the situation, the words tumbling out in a rush. The guards escorted us to our car, but the damage was done. The message was clear. Trent could get to us anytime, anywhere, even with an ankle monitor supposedly tracking his movements. As we drove home, Samuel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched with tension. Neither of us spoke, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken fear and the growing realization that nowhere felt safe anymore. When we got home, there was a package on the porch addressed to me, the brown paper wrapping ordinary except for my name written in jagged letters. The handwriting was distinctive, sharp angles and heavy pressure that had torn through the paper in places, revealing the contents beneath. We approached it cautiously, Samuel using a stick from the yard to prod it first, checking for any signs of movement or ticking. Inside was a doll with its head torn off, stuffing spilling out like entrails. The doll was clearly meant to resemble me. Someone had painted its remaining features to match my hair color and style, even adding tiny replicas of the earrings I wore most often. The attention to detail was disturbing, suggesting a level of obsession and planning that went beyond simple intimidation. Pinned to it was a note in the same jagged handwriting, "Tick-tock." The implied countdown sent a chill through me, goosebumps rising on my arms despite the warm afternoon sun. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every distant car sound had me sitting bolt upright, my heart racing. I had pushed my dresser in front of my door, the heavy wooden furniture providing some illusion of security, though I knew it would only slow an intruder by seconds. The baseball bat Samuel had lent me lay beside me on the bed, my fingers periodically reaching out to touch it, to confirm it was still there, still accessible. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs for some water, the hardwood floor cold beneath my bare feet. Each step creaked slightly, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet house. I moved carefully, avoiding the spots I knew made the most noise, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance in the darkness. I nearly screamed when I saw a figure in the kitchen, but it was just my uncle, sitting in the dark, the moonlight casting blue shadows across his face. He was at the table, a glass of what looked like whiskey in front of him, his expression distant and troubled. He didn't seem surprised to see me, as if he had expected someone else would also be unable to find peace and sleep tonight. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. The question was unnecessary, rhetorical. None of us were sleeping well anymore, our nights fragmented by anxiety and hypervigilance, our days blurring together in a haze of fatigue. I shook my head, filling a glass from the tap, the water cool against my parched throat. The simple action felt strangely normal, a mundane task in a life that had become anything but ordinary. I sat across from him at the table, the familiar wood grain visible even in the dim light, tracing patterns with my fingertip as I gathered my thoughts. What are we going to do? The question hung between us, heavy with all the fear and uncertainty of our situation. I hadn't meant to ask it aloud, but once the words escaped, I couldn't take them back. Part of me still hoped he would have an answer, some solution I hadn't thought of, some way to restore the safety and peace I had briefly found in this home. He sighed heavily, the sound weighted with months of fear and stress. "The security system gets installed tomorrow, and I've been thinking, maybe we should move. Start fresh somewhere Trent can't find us." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the moonlight. The idea had clearly been on his mind for some time, not a new thought but one he had been reluctant to voice until now. The thought of running away made my stomach churn, acid rising in my throat. That's exactly what he wants, for us to be scared, to disrupt our lives. The words came out more forcefully than I intended, anger momentarily overriding fear. The idea of Trent winning, of him successfully driving us from our home, was suddenly intolerable. I know, but I have to think about everyone's safety. Daisy's having nightmares. Samuel keeps a knife under his pillow now. He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, filled with a mixture of resignation and determination. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a fight you can't win. The next morning, I woke to frantic barking, high-pitched and desperate. Pepper, the family's golden retriever, was going crazy in the backyard, her usually friendly demeanor replaced with agitation. The sound pulled me from a fitful sleep, instantly setting my nerves on edge. Pepper rarely barked. She was a gentle, well-trained dog who typically greeted strangers with a wagging tail rather than alarm. I rushed downstairs to find my aunt already at the back door, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock. The entire yard was covered in broken glass, bottles smashed everywhere, glittering dangerously in the morning sun like a field of deadly diamonds. Beer bottles, wine bottles, liquor bottles, dozens of them, deliberately shattered to create a hazardous landscape that would injure anyone, or any pet, who ventured outside. Pepper was confined to the small concrete patio, barking frantically at the destruction of her territory, unable to cross the sea of glass to investigate, and spray-painted across our back fence in red, dripping letters that looked disturbingly like blood. Nowhere to hide. The message stretched the entire length of the wooden fence, the letters large and crude, paint running down in rivulets that resembled tears, or blood. The sight of it made my breath catch, a physical reminder that our home was not the sanctuary we pretended it to be. The security company arrived that afternoon, 2 technicians in blue uniforms installing equipment with efficient movements. By evening, we had cameras covering every approach to the house, motion sensors on all windows and doors, and a panic button system that would alert police immediately if triggered. The main console displayed feeds from all the cameras, a grid of black and white images showing our property from every angle. The technicians walked us through the system, explaining how to arm and disarm it, how to check the camera feeds remotely from our phones, how to use the panic buttons that now resided in every room. "I feel like we're living in a prison," Daisy said quietly, as we watched the technician finish up, her voice small and defeated. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, a defensive posture she had adopted more and more frequently in recent weeks. Her normally bright eyes were dull with exhaustion, her creative energy sapped by the constant state of alert we all lived in. I couldn't argue with that, but at least prisoners had guards to protect them. We were our own wardens in this self-made tailor-made fortress. The security system offered some peace of mind, but it also served as a constant reminder of why we needed it. Every beep when a door opened, every notification of movement detected outside, was a tangible reminder of the threat that loomed over us. That night, I checked all the camera feeds before going to bed, scanning each square on the monitor for any sign of movement. Everything looked clear, just empty sidewalks and still trees. The night was quiet, almost eerily so, as if the world outside had collectively held its breath. The security panel glowed with reassuring green lights, indicating all sensors were active and functioning properly. I double-checked my window locks, then wedged a chair under my doorknob for good measure, the wood pressing firmly against the carpet. These extra precautions had become part of my nightly ritual, a routine that provided more psychological comfort than actual security. I knew that if Trent truly wanted to get in, a chair wouldn't stop him, but the act of placing it there gave me enough peace of mind to at least attempt sleep. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the house alarm was blaring, a piercing wail that cut through the darkness. I bolted upright, heart hammering against my ribs. The clock read 3:17 a.m., the red digits glowing ominously in the dark. For a moment, I was disoriented, the sudden transition from sleep to high alert leaving me confused and panicked. I grabbed my phone and ran into the hallway, nearly colliding with Samuel, his hair disheveled from sleep. He had the baseball bat gripped in one hand, his phone in the other, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. Daisy's door remained closed. Either she was sleeping through the alarm, unlikely, or too terrified to emerge from her room. Uncle was already downstairs, checking the security panel, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons. "Motion sensor on the back porch," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Police are on their way." The system had automatically called emergency services when the alarm triggered, a feature that now seemed worth every penny of the installation cost. We huddled in the living room, jumping at every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock, the distant wail of approaching sirens. My aunt joined us, wrapping a robe tightly around herself, her face pale in the dim light. We stood close together, finding comfort in proximity, no one willing to voice the fear that gripped us all. What if this time, Trent had found a way in? What if the security system had detected him too late? When the police arrived, they found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no one on the property. But the back porch camera had been spray-painted black, rendering it useless, a blind spot in our defenses. The officer shined his flashlight on the camera, illuminating the thick black paint that completely covered the lens. The paint was still tacky, confirming this had happened recently. While we slept, someone had been on our property, deliberately disabling our security measures. Someone was definitely here, the officer said, examining the camera with a flashlight, but they knew exactly where the blind spots were. He traced the edge of the painted area with his gloved finger, his expression grim. The precision of the vandalism was disturbing. The paint covered only the lens and immediate surrounding area, suggesting someone who knew exactly what they were targeting. A chill ran down my spine, goosebumps rising on my arms. The security system had only been installed for a few hours. How could anyone know its layout already? The implication was clear and terrifying. Either someone had been watching the installation process, or they had inside information about our security measures. Either possibility suggested a level of planning and surveillance that made my skin crawl. The next day, I called the security company, pacing back and forth in the kitchen as I waited on hold, irritating music playing in my ear. The cheerful melody seemed almost offensive given the circumstances, a jarring contrast to the tension that filled our home. I counted the tiles on the kitchen floor as I paced, trying to channel my anxiety into something productive, something measurable. "Valley Security, how can I help you?" A cheerful voice finally answered. The woman's professional tone was at odds with the urgency I felt, her script-like greeting suggesting this was just another routine call in her day. I explained the situation, asking if anyone could have accessed information about our system. My voice shook slightly as I described the painted camera, the apparent knowledge of our security layout. The implications were too disturbing to ignore. If someone had information about our system, what else might they know about us? The customer service rep checked their records, keyboard clicking in the background. The sound of her typing seemed to go on forever, each second stretching into an eternity as I waited for information that could confirm or deny my worst fears. "It looks like someone called yesterday afternoon requesting information about your installation," she said, her cheerful tone fading. "They claimed to be the homeowner and asked for details about the camera placement." The admission came reluctantly, her voice dropping as she realized the potential seriousness of the breach. My blood ran cold, a chill spreading through my body. "And you just gave them that information?" The words came out sharper than I intended, anger temporarily overriding fear. The idea that our security had been compromised so easily, so completely, was almost too much to process. "They verified the account with the correct phone number and address," she replied defensively. "It's standard procedure." Her tone suggested this was a reasonable explanation, that following protocol somehow absolved the company of responsibility for what had happened. I hung up, feeling sick. Trent was always one step ahead, playing chess while we were playing checkers. He knew our phone number, our address. Of course he did. He had lived here. And he knew exactly how to manipulate systems, how to sound authoritative and legitimate when it served his purposes. The realization that our attempts at security had been so easily circumvented left me feeling hollow, defeated in a way I hadn't felt since arriving in Pennsylvania. That evening, Daisy received a text from an unknown number, her phone chiming with the notification, "Nice security system, shame about the basement window." She stared at the screen, her face draining of color, hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The message was simple but devastating, proof that Trent not only knew about our security measures, but had identified a weakness we hadn't even considered. We rushed to check, feet pounding down the stairs. The small window in the basement laundry room, the one place we hadn't put a sensor because it was too small for an adult to fit through, had been tampered with. The lock was broken, hanging uselessly from the frame. The window itself was intact, but the damage to the lock was deliberate and recent. The wood around it splintered and fresh. "He's toying with us," Samuel said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "He could have gotten in if he wanted to. He's just letting us know he can." His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. The psychological warfare was perhaps more effective than an actual break-in would have been. Trent was showing us that our safety was an illusion, that he could violate our space at any time of his choosing. We added another sensor to the basement window that night, the technician returning with an apologetic expression. He worked quickly, installing not just a sensor, but reinforcing the window with additional locks and a metal security grate. "This should hold against pretty much anything short of explosives," he assured us, though his attempt at humor fell flat in the tense atmosphere of the basement. None of us slept, taking shifts to watch the security monitors, jumping at every shadow that moved across the screens. The night stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the changing of the guard, one family member retiring to rest while another took their place before the monitors, eyes scanning constantly for any sign of movement, any indication that our nightmare had returned. The following morning, I had an idea, the plan forming in my mind as I watched a police car drive slowly past our house. Their increased patrols another measure that felt inadequate against Trent's determination. The officers were doing their best, but they couldn't be everywhere at once, couldn't watch our house 24/7. We needed something more definitive, something that would end this once and for all. "We need to set a trap," I told my uncle, keeping my voice low even though we were alone in the kitchen. "Make him think he's winning, then catch him in the act." The idea had come to me during my pre-dawn watch shift, a strategy born of desperation and too many crime shows, but one that might actually work. Uncle looked skeptical, lines of exhaustion etched deeply around his eyes. "How?" He leaned against the counter, coffee mug cradled in his hands like a lifeline, the dark circles under his eyes testament to another sleepless night. "We make it look like we're leaving, all of us. Make him think the house will be empty." The plan took shape as I spoke, details falling into place with surprising clarity. "We pack up, make a big show of loading the car, tell the neighbors we're going away for a while, but we don't actually leave. We hide, wait for him to make his move." We spent the day ostentatiously packing suitcases, loading them into the car where anyone watching could see. We made multiple trips in and out of the house, carrying boxes and bags, speaking loudly about our trip whenever we were outside. Daisy even tearfully hugged her friend who came to say goodbye, the performance convincing enough that the friend also began to cry, promising to water the plants and check the mail while we were gone. Uncle called our neighbor Phil loudly from the front yard, explaining we were going to stay with relatives for a while until things calmed down, his voice carrying in the quiet street. Phil was in on the plan, his concerned nods and questions about when we'd return all part of the show we were putting on for any watching eyes. The performance was as much for Trent's benefit as for any potential informants he might have in the neighborhood. The more people who believed we were leaving, the more likely the information would reach him. That evening we drove away, but only to the end of the block where we parked behind Phil's house, out of sight from the street. We sat in the car for several minutes, engine off, waiting to ensure no one had followed us. The silence was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts, the weight of what we were attempting pressing down on us all. Then we snuck back through the yards, entering through Phil's back door and crossing through his basement into ours, through a connecting door in the foundation wall that Phil had shown my uncle years ago. The passage was narrow and dusty, clearly unused for years until now, cobwebs brushing against our faces as we moved single file through the dark space, flashlights providing the only illumination. "These old houses were built close together," Phil explained as he led us through. "During the big flood of '72, folks cut these passages to help each other evacuate if needed." His voice echoed slightly in the confined space, the history lesson a welcome distraction from the anxiety of our current situation. Never thought we'd be using it for something like this, though. We settled in to wait, all lights off, monitoring the security cameras from our phones, the blue glow illuminating our tense faces. We positioned ourselves strategically throughout the house, Samuel near the front door, my uncle by the back, Daisy and my aunt in the upstairs hallway, me in the basement near the compromised window. Each of us had a panic button and a direct line to the police, who were waiting nearby, briefed on our plan and ready to respond at a moment's notice. Hours passed. Nothing. The house creaked and settled around us, familiar sounds now seeming ominous. Every tick of the heating system, every rustle of branches against windows, every distant car passing on the street, all became potential threats. Our nerves stretched to breaking point by the constant state of alert. "Maybe he's not coming," Daisy whispered around midnight, her voice barely audible through the walkie-talkie we were using to communicate without making noise. The doubt in her voice reflected what we were all beginning to think, that our plan had failed, that Trent had somehow seen through our ruse. Just as the words left her mouth, one of the cameras picked up movement, a figure in dark clothing approaching the back of the house, moving with purpose. The notification appeared simultaneously on all our phones, the silent alert causing my heart to race, adrenaline flooding my system in an instant. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the culmination of our plan. My heart pounded as we watched Trent. It was definitely him, his distinctive gait unmistakable. Test the basement window. Finding it now locked and alarmed, he moved to the back door. He worked on the lock for several minutes before the door swung open, the alarm system mysteriously silent. He must have found a way to disable it, perhaps using the same inside information he had used to learn about the camera placement. Uncle's hand hovered over the panic button on his phone, finger poised to press it. "Wait," I whispered through the walkie-talkie, gripping my own phone tightly. "Let him get all the way in." We needed to catch him in the act, needed irrefutable evidence of breaking and entering, of violation of the restraining order. A partial entry might give his lawyer room to argue, might result in another technicality that would set him free. We watched as Trent entered the kitchen, his movements confident, not the least bit hesitant. He moved with purpose, heading straight for my bedroom, as if he knew exactly where he was going. From my position in the basement, I could hear his footsteps above me, the floorboards creaking under his weight as he moved through the house that had once been his home. We could hear him rummaging around upstairs, drawers opening and closing, footsteps heavy on the floorboards above us. The sounds were chilling, the methodical search of someone looking for something specific, or perhaps simply violating our space because he could. Through the security app, I could see Daisy and my aunt pressed against the wall in the upstairs hallway, their faces tense as they listened to Trent moving from room to room, coming dangerously close to their hiding place. "Now," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The moment had come. Trent was fully in the house, his presence undeniable, his violation of the restraining order complete. We had him. Uncle hit the panic button. Simultaneously, Samuel triggered the house alarm. The shrieking filled the air as we heard Trent curse loudly upstairs, his footsteps thundering across the ceiling. The sudden noise after hours of tense silence was jarring, the alarm seeming to penetrate every corner of the house, leaving no room for thought or hesitation. We stayed hidden in the basement as we heard him running down the stairs, his breathing heavy. From my position near the basement door, I could hear the panic in his movements, the frantic quality of someone whose plan has gone suddenly, catastrophically wrong. His footsteps pounded across the kitchen floor, heading for the back door, his planned escape route. He ran for the back door, straight into the arms of the police officers who had just arrived, their response time impressively quick thanks to the increased patrols in our area. Through the basement window, I could see the flash of police lights, blue and red painting the yard in alternating colors. The sounds of struggle reached us, Trent's shouts of protest, the officers' commands to get down, the metallic click of handcuffs closing around wrists. This time, there was no talking his way out. Breaking and entering, violation of a restraining order, destruction of property. The charges piled up like a house of cards. The police found a knife in his pocket and a backpack containing duct tape, rope, and a bottle of chloroform, evidence that made even the most stoic officer's expression harden. The items spoke of intentions far darker than mere harassment or intimidation, suggesting a plan that would have escalated our nightmare to unimaginable levels. He was planning to wait for us to come back, I realized with horror, my voice barely above a whisper, or to take something to use against us later. The implications of the items in his possession were too disturbing to fully process. What might have happened if our plan hadn't worked, if we had actually left as he believed we had? The next few days were a blur of police statements and court appearances, the fluorescent lights of the courthouse harsh and unforgiving. The wooden benches in the courtroom were hard and uncomfortable, but we sat through every minute of the proceedings, determined to see this through to the end. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the restraining order violation, the breaking and entering, the disturbing contents of the backpack. There was no room for technicalities this time, no procedural errors to exploit. Trent was deemed a danger to himself and others and sent to a mandatory inpatient psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. The judge's decision was delivered in a firm, unwavering voice that filled the courtroom, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Trent stood impassively as the sentence was read, his expression blank, eyes fixed on some middle distance as if he wasn't fully present. His ankle monitor data showed he'd been violating the restraining order for weeks, coming near our house almost nightly, staying just far enough away to avoid triggering the immediate alert, but close enough to watch, to plan. The prosecutor presented maps showing his movements, the digital breadcrumbs revealing a pattern of obsession and surveillance that had gone undetected until now. The evidence painted a picture of someone who had made tormenting us his full-time occupation, who had dedicated every waking moment to planning his revenge. I thought I would feel relief when they took him away, his hands cuffed behind his back as they led him from the courtroom. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. The constant vigilance had drained something from me, leaving me exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. As we walked out of the courthouse, the bright sunlight seemed harsh and intrusive after the dim interior, making me squint and turn away. The world continued around us, people walking by, cars passing, life proceeding as normal, oblivious to the battle we had just fought and won. "It's over," my aunt said, hugging me tight, her familiar perfume, vanilla and something floral, enveloping me. Her arms were warm and secure around my shoulders, her embrace conveying all the things words couldn't express: gratitude, relief, the beginning of healing. We can start to heal now. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows playing across the textured surface, my phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your fake little victory. You'll never be safe." The words glowed in the darkness, menacing despite their digital form. My heart, which had just begun to settle into a normal rhythm after weeks of constant alert, immediately began racing again, the brief peace shattered by 13 simple words. The words glowed in the darkness, menacing despite their digital form. I reported it immediately, hands shaking as I called the detective assigned to our case. The authorities traced it to a burner phone purchased by Marcus, Trent's loyal friend who'd been watching us at the mall. The detective arrived within the hour, taking my phone as evidence, his expression grim as he read the message for himself. The investigation was swift and thorough, digital forensics tracking the message back to its source with impressive speed. It was a violation of Trent's probation terms, no contact, direct or indirect, with any of us. The judge was notified immediately, the new evidence added to Trent's file, his case reviewed with the additional context of continued harassment despite incarceration. The message demonstrated that his obsession hadn't diminished, that institutional walls weren't enough to contain his determination to torment us. Trent's stay at the inpatient facility was extended indefinitely, the judge citing his continued attempts to harass and intimidate as evidence of his danger to the community. His devices were confiscated, his communication privileges restricted. The facility implemented additional security measures, monitoring his interactions more closely, limiting his access to anything that could be used to reach out out to the outside world. Marcus was charged as an accomplice, his smug expression finally faltering when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The detective had shown me his mugshot, the shock and disbelief evident in his wide eyes, the reality of consequences finally sinking in. For too long, Marcus and others like him had enabled Trent's behavior, participating in his campaigns of harassment without experiencing any repercussions themselves. That time was over. Slowly, life began to return to something resembling normal. We kept the security system, the cameras a constant reminder of what we'd been through. The blinking lights on the control panel became part of the background noise of our lives, a persistent reminder of vigilance but no longer the focus of our every waking moment. Uncle still checked the locks 3 times before bed, a ritual that brought him comfort. I still woke at every unusual sound, my body conditioned to expect danger. But we were sleeping again, eating regular meals. Daisy even started bringing friends over after school, their laughter filling the house with a sound that had been absent for too long. The first time I heard her giggling with her best friend in the living room, it was like something frozen inside me began to thaw, a tight knot of tension finally beginning to loosen. One evening, about a month after Trent was committed, I sat on the front porch with my aunt, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was writing in her poetry notebook, something she hadn't done since this all began, her pen moving across the page with purpose. The scratch of her pen against paper was soothing, a gentle sound that spoke of creativity returning, of life continuing despite the trauma we had endured. "Do you regret coming here?" she asked suddenly, looking up at me, her eyes searching my face. The question caught me off guard, making me pause and truly consider my answer. So much had happened since that first WhatsApp message, so much fear and pain and struggle, but also connection, belonging, purpose. I thought about my lonely childhood, the empty house, the breathing exercises instead of medicine when I was sick and suffering, the silent meals, the absent parents, the crushing isolation that had been my constant companion for 18 years. I remembered the feeling of invisibility, of moving through the world without making an impression, without being truly seen by anyone. I thought about the fear and chaos of the past few months, the sleepless nights and constant anxiety, the security systems and court appearances, the threatening messages and violated spaces, the baseball bat under the bed, the chair against the door, the constant looking over my shoulder. Then I looked at my aunt's kind face, the lines around her eyes crinkling when she smiled, at Uncle grilling in the backyard, laughing at something Samuel said, his shoulders relaxed for the first time in months, at Daisy playing fetch with Pepper on the lawn, the dog's tail wagging furiously as she bounded after the ball. I thought about family dinners where everyone talked at once, movie nights huddled together on the couch, inside jokes that I was now part of, the feeling of belonging that I had never experienced before coming here. "No," I said honestly, the word carrying the weight of everything I'd experienced. "This is our home." And I meant it. This place, these people, had become my home in a way that transcended the physical structure, in a way my parents' house had never been. Home wasn't just a building, it was the feeling of safety, of belonging, of being seen and valued. It was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth all the fear and struggle we had endured. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, my cat curled up beside me, her warm body and gentle purring a comfort I'd missed. I'd brought her from my parents' house the week before, finally feeling safe enough to have her here, to truly make this place my home. Luna had adapted quickly, exploring every corner of the house with curious eyes, eventually claiming my bed as her territory, just as she had in my old room. Her familiar weight against my side was grounding, a connection to my past that I could carry forward into this new life. In the morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, no alarms, no panic, just the sounds of my family moving around downstairs, starting their day, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee maker, the murmur of conversation, ordinary sounds that had become extraordinary in their normalcy, in the peace they represented after so much chaos. I reached for my phone and deleted the texting app I'd used to lure Trent that first time, the one that had set everything in motion. I wouldn't need it anymore. The calculated, strategic part of me that had orchestrated his downfall could rest now, giving way to something softer, something healing. The screen glowed briefly as the app disappeared, taking with it a chapter of my life that was now closed. As I headed downstairs for breakfast, the smell of pancakes and maple syrup guiding me, I realized something. Trent had tried to destroy this family for years. He'd used fear as a weapon, isolation as a tool. In the end, he'd accomplished exactly the opposite. We were closer than ever, stronger, unbreakable in a way we hadn't been before. The trials we had faced together had forged bonds between us that couldn't be severed, creating a family unit that was resilient in ways we never could have been individually. Uncle looked up as I entered the kitchen, sliding a plate of pancakes my way, steam rising from the golden stack. "Sleep well?" His question was simple but loaded with meaning. Sleep had been a luxury denied to us for so long, peaceful rest an elusive dream during the worst of our ordeal. I smiled, accepting the plate, the weight of it solid and real in my hands. Yeah, I really did. And it was true. I had slept deeply and dreamlessly, without the nightmares that had plagued me for weeks. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The first of many steps toward healing, toward reclaiming the life that Trent had tried so hard to destroy.